So I'm going to talk about five things that I think make a difference in the world of consulting. Now, these can be extrapolated to other types of jobs inside a company, whether it's a product management job, an operations job, a finance job. It could be if you're a teacher, it could be as an entrepreneur, it could be as a nurse, any type of role as an attorney, et cetera, et cetera. Because many times you have to be able to converse, understand the issues. So here's my top five list. So the first thing is to build cases out of articles from the Wall Street Journal. And as a business person, picking up, and I'm speaking mostly to business professionals, although I think this applies in other domains, other career paths as well, but specifically for business people. So the Wall Street Journal tells you about all the different things that companies, organizations, governments, et cetera, are doing well, and then also not so well. And many times for interviews, you need to demonstrate business acumen, domain knowledge. There is a wealth of information in the Wall Street Journal, and I use the Wall Street Journal myself to build cases for the various mock interviews and other things that we do. This may seem really obvious. However, I have seen few people take this to the maximum degree of impact. And I'll give you an example of a client of mine who gave me this tip. This is directly from this individual. And one of the things that he shared with me was that every morning he made a cup of coffee, he sat down at wherever and read 4 to 5 articles in the Wall Street Journal. And every one of them, he would read the article once, he would build kind of a case structure out of it, or he would brainstorm different ideas on how to solve the problems, or maybe there was something in it that he could create a market sizing question. If he had 5 minutes with the CEO, what might be a couple of questions that he would want to ask? And he treated all those articles like mini cases. And over the course of about 3 months, imagine doing this 4 or 5 days a week. How much content, how much industry and market and business awareness that you build simply by doing this, 15, 20, 30 minutes a day. And I remember after he received his offer, which was from the Boston Consulting Group, one of the things that he said to me was, Pam, every client of yours, please tell them to do this. This was such an impactful part of my prep process. So, how do you do this? Well, first, having a subscription to the Wall Street Journal is beneficial, obviously. And what I like to do is go into the business section of the Wall Street Journal, look by industry. I happen to pull up the auto and transportation industry and find an article that looks like there's something interesting from a broad business standpoint. So as I was perusing this today, I thought to myself, oh my gosh, this idea of charging stations, that could be very interesting. So, what if I was a consultant and I had to work with General Motors to figure out where they were going to expand the placement of 2,700 electric vehicle chargers? How would I organize a project like that? Where would I place them? What would my criteria be? What concerns would I have? Oh, it says here there's an undisclosed amount of money that they would spend. Well, why don't I estimate how much that would cost? Equipment, implementation, how could I go research that? And this is a fantastic activity to just make your neurological processes for not only the consulting job but any interview that you're preparing for. If you happen to be looking at a healthcare company, maybe you read some of the, healthcare articles and stay very current on the industry. But if you are in fact looking at consulting specific jobs, treat every one of these articles like it's a case. If you get really, really good at it and you have a chance to practice with your peers, then one of the best things to do is craft this into a case and then deliver it to one of your colleagues. So I love that. And it's not time intensive. It should be really interesting and fun. And it gives you a huge amount of breadth of knowledge. Okay, so that's tip number one, casing from the Wall Street Journal, taken by quote, by experience from my colleague Matthew, who went to work for the Boston Consulting Group. Tip number two, then, this is also a study area. So we call this studying the facts. And in fact, facts we call factoids. It's just a fun way to express these. This is not about memorization. This is about creating reference information that you may have to draw upon. For those of you that have done some work around the consulting job already, you are very aware that you have to do a case interview. For those of you that might just be exploring this career path, you have to do a case interview, which means solving a problem live for 45 minutes in front of your interviewer. In corporate interviews, the case might be a little less than 45 minutes, but it still requires you to think through things. There is not an expectation that you have a giant encyclopedia in your brain. However, it is good to have certain references. One of the consulting firms, EY Parthenon, they regularly use market sizing in their case interview. And market sizing is the kind of thing that if you have some knowledge of factoids, which is typically populations, maybe demographics, maybe certain buying characteristics, you give yourself a little more confidence. It's a bit like when my kids who are just learning to swim, they're okay swimmers, but there's times that I'll put them in the pool with floaties on, right? Floaties just gives them a little bit more confidence, okay? That's what having some knowledge of these facts or factoids gives you. It's interesting, they're easy to study, and their application is vast. So I have a couple other colleagues of mine who, both of them also ended up at the Boston Consulting Group. This was something they would quiz each other on, and it became a challenge. And I don't know, some people have certain ways that they entertain themselves. They would get together on an evening with some type of adult beverage, and then they would challenge each other on factoids. Now, specifically, what do I mean by factoids? So well, let me show you a few. These are easy to access, powerful, and they don't require you memorizing precise numbers. I have a schedule. Let me see if I can increase the size of this just a little bit to make it easier. I have a schedule that I've built, and this is all around populations. And I start with extra large cities, and I get a little bit smaller. And what I do is rather than trying to memorize the exact population of a city, which seems to me very hard, what I do is I put them in categories like t-shirts. So New York has a XXL large t-shirt. And so if I ever got a case that had a market sizing or some other problem that I had to quantify and it involved New York City, I would know that New York City wears an extra large t-shirt. And that is a population of about 10 to 20 million. Doesn't matter what the exact number is because this is all estimation. If I got a case that involved Phoenix, Arizona, they are a medium-sized t-shirt. Okay. And then those are the US cities. And if you have things that are outside the US, you can put a couple anchoring cities in there. And this way, you don't have to memorize the populations of every city around the world. So I have no idea what the population of Vancouver, Canada is. I have been to Vancouver. I think it's kind of a medium-sized city. I know that Toronto is probably ish somewhere close to Chicago, but I know Vancouver's much smaller. So I would just put a medium-sized t-shirt on them. And then we can apply this to states, US states. We can apply this to different countries. So they have different population scales, but the extra small to double X large still applies. And if you quiz yourself on this periodically, you get really good at just kind of remembering and kind of feeling your way through things. This is a great activity. And over a period of time, if you spend 5 minutes a day quizzing yourself, 10 minutes a day quizzing yourself, the impact of that is really high. And when you come to the interview and you get a market sizing question and you have to estimate the insurance market in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and you say to yourself, I don't know the population of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, but I'm feeling like it's a small city, maybe even extra small. So I'm going to make this assumption, and then I'm going to tell the interviewer, and then it doesn't look like you're totally guessing. It looks like you actually have a framework. There are other things that you can easily study and having them categorized. So I have 5 categories of factoids. I have populations, I have demographics, I have consumer behavior, I have measures, and then I have money. And the reason that I have those 5 categories is that over time, the patterns of the quantitative aspects of cases kind of fall into those groups. So I'm going to focus. So demographics might be things like by age. Knowing that can be really valuable. And then there's just some other things, the urban population, household members, income levels, marriage rates, unfortunately, divorce rates, and maybe percentage of college students. So the nice thing is if you had, for example, a notebook with these categories, and then you proactively put a few of these things together, and then if you get a case or you get a question and you don't know that information, you don't have that factoid at your disposal, what you go do is a little bit of research and then you add it. And this occurs throughout your preparation period. But I'm really good, so I'm not a great memorizer. I have more of a visual memory and a conceptual memory, but I am oddly not great at memorizing facts. I wasn't a great test taker, standardized test taker. There's just, that's not my thing. But I'm really good at remembering groups of things. And I'm really good at when I summarize things because I have a little bit of this visual memory, the act of summarizing it helps me remember those things. And then it's not about precision, it's about closeness. So if you had put this together in your studies and then you got a case and you were trying to remember the demographics of more or less the teenage group, you're like, oh, I can't remember if it's 15 or 20%. It wouldn't matter as long as you're close because the interviewer is happy that you're in the right range, especially when you're doing something like market sizing. So those are demographics. And then we have things like consumer behavior, which might be different things related to, well, not behaviors right now, but behaviors that are most prominent in our society. So in normal times, unfortunately, during COVID, these are not as normal, but it's things like how many people travel by air, domestically, internationally, how many cars are sold in a given year, what about cable TV subscriptions, those sorts of things. So I put those together just kind of based on everyday things. And if I had a case and it had some aspect and I didn't know what it was, I'd add it to my notes. Then I have a measurement. This goes back to a couple of people that I worked with. I had an individual I worked with who was formerly a fifth grade math teacher. One of the things that was really interesting about her background was that math is pretty quantitative, but she was really, really good at teaching math. But in terms of working mental math and working it quickly, she was finding that to be extremely challenging. And so over the course of the summer, what she did was built herself a list like this of the metric conversions and the math conversions. And then she created some shortcuts for these so that she didn't have to memorize all these numbers. So that's one of the other tips with some of these factoids is you don't want to memorize them because these numbers are pretty minuscule. So if you notice in column in my column here, I have the actual values and then I've created a shortcut value that I try to remember. And then one of the nice things about an activity like this is you could put them on flashcards, index cards, handwrite them. And then maybe you're waiting, 10 minutes between phone calls. I won't suggest that you do this when you're on a business Zoom call, but you could just pull out your flashcards if you have 10 or 15 minutes and you start to develop those mental muscles. Same thing for the monetary category. So different kind of broad macroeconomic numbers, and then also some particular financial market numbers. So again, these are the kinds of things that you could put on a flashcard and periodically run through. If you're working with partners, if you've got a spouse or some other significant other roommate who's helping you prepare, these are great things to just do. And then, by the way, when you read the Wall Street Journal, these two activities are reinforcing. Okay. Just so you all know, when I'm working with individuals, I do not give them these kinds of schedules. I believe, and this is maybe the professor in me, I believe there's benefit in actually developing this yourself by way of doing the research, writing it down. Each person has a cognition process that's a little bit unique. The way that I summarize data might not work for you, but the flashcard process is probably one of the best and the simplest, and it's cheap. You can go to just about any Walgreens and get yourself a set of index cards. The key is to have frequent repetition and review and not make it a memorization. Also, think about when you're working on different business problems, particularly cases, how you can apply some of these factoids. Okay. So that's factoids. Don't memorize, but study. Okay. All right. My third tip, and this may come across as one of the most obvious things, but it is to take and apply feedback, really. And this is a comment that was made to me by one of my clients who received a job offer. This individual happened to get a couple of job offers. The one that he accepted was with Alex Partners. So now, with his job offer in hand, many students came to him to ask if they could practice a case or run through stories. And what he relayed to me one day that he found a bit frustrating is that maybe he met with someone a month ago, gave him some feedback, and then had a second follow up meeting, and the same issue persisted. So, persistence is a wonderful thing. Persistence is not a good thing when it's an issue with your interview prep. And so, we talked about this a little bit, and I think it's something that is a little bit tricky to give you specifics on how to. And it may also kind of come across like, what what does it mean? People give me feedback all the time. Of course I apply it. But the question is, are you really applying it? And I think that what I want to convey to you is that sometimes in your practice, in order to get better, you have to do things terrible. You have to take risks in the way that you're doing your work. This could mean maybe it's the conclusion of the case at the very end. And maybe one of the things that you receive feedback on is that it took you too much time to put your notes together, that you should shorten that amount of time. So, the feedback, the way you could apply it is practice some conclusions and take no time. Just speak spontaneously, don't write things down, mess it up a little bit, but get yourself comfortable doing that. Why do I suggest this? Well, there's actually a learning process that we have to go through sometimes. In order to get things right, we have to unlearn the way that we're doing things wrong. And the best way to unlearn it is just to completely go 180 degrees in the opposite direction and to do it completely wrong and build our skills back up. I have learned this a few times and I consistently still learn it. I've always been a reasonably decent public speaker. I can't say why. It just was one of those things that was oddball in my skill set. But a few years back, I had to do a TED talk. I didn't have to do, I was invited to. And that style of speaking is completely different. And I started with my normal approach, and a bunch of the coaches said, you have to throw all of that away. And I had to completely rebuild the way that I gave a presentation. And it was very powerful and made a significant difference in so many things that I do, whether it's webinars like this, whether it's teaching, whether it's guest speaking, which I do occasionally. But I know, and this is why this is so hard, I know that it was very scary the first couple of coaching sessions I had following my initial presentation. I would apply this to the experience interview, not just the case. There may be things that you could do to better walk through your resume. Making small tweaks sometimes won't make you better. Occasionally, you have to completely retool and try something different. What that all comes down to is that the feedback that you get is important, but finding ways to apply it and make a significant difference in the way you approach your interview is crucial. And I'll tell you the last reason why this is so important. When you there's two reasons I'm going to give you actually. So the first one is in the interview process. In consulting interviews, it is likely that you will have a chance to engage either by way of networking or some pre-interview support, coaching, mentoring with the consultants at the firm. And you may get a chance to do that on a couple of occasions. The consultants themselves, if you met with the same person twice, that individual will listen and see if you've made progress since your first meeting. And the reason for that is my second point. When you get into this job, the amount of feedback that you get is intense, extensive, probably some people would say overwhelming. If you are given feedback about an analysis you did and you don't apply it for the next iteration, you will run into issues. Consulting is a very feedback heavy job. And I think about it. I am an ex consultant. The co founder of our company and our CTO, she is an ex consultant. We've had interns last summer, this summer. We had an intern in the past who did not take feedback. Now we have a couple interns. We give them a lot of feedback. and we could substantially see the difference in how they apply our feedback and behave, perform, do work differently and quickly. So these things again are all integrated. The snapshot of how you do this is if, for example, you're practicing case interviews, you should always record your case. Especially right now, if you all are doing this stuff virtually, you have access to recording devices. You can also do it on your phone, and then watch an old case and watch a new case and see if you can notice your difference. Okay. I see in the chat there was a question about what interns did well and what they did not. I mean, I'll give you a very specific example. We like project plans. Just one of our things. My colleague and I both come from consulting firms that were exceptional at project management. We both worked for a firm that's now part of PwC. She was at Accenture. They do exceptional project management. And so we like project plans. When you are a college student, you might have a syllabus, but you've probably never created a project plan. And we ask our interns, here's your assignment, here's your project, create your project plan with some deadlines and review that with us. We can definitely see the difference. And it's not about excellence, it's about effort when you're an intern and you're learning. So one of our interns last summer just couldn't do it. Tried lots of feedback. We have 2 interns this summer. One of them probably doesn't excel at it, but is developing the skill. The other person turned their own kind of checklist skills that they use as a student into project plan skills and has done an exceptional job. So we as the managers are trying to give that type of feedback, right? I do the same thing in my coaching, is give feedback on specific areas. And then if I meet with you again, I want to see that. And I don't think I'm alone in that. And you should want to see it as well, because if you don't continue to progress applying some of that feedback, it's going to leave you a little bit short at the interview stage. Okay. So that's number 3. These are going to get more fun and interesting. My tip number 4 is about connecting and connections. I am just going to give my point of view that I believe in the present environment that we are in, making connections with people is ever more important. It's also difficult because it's forcing people to learn to build relationships in ways that are a bit awkward. I think it's very natural that people don't love networking by phone or by video. People will say, oh gosh, I'm a much better in-person person, et cetera, et cetera. If I go back to what I would have told all of you a year ago, I would make this same statement. Make connections more deeply than you think you need to. And I have a much greater appreciation for this on the other side of my consulting career. But when I think back to the interview stage that I was in, I think that there's some things that I did extremely well. And I see it in some of the other individuals who have done really well in their own interview processes as well. So what does it mean to make connections more deeply? You're meeting a consultant at a firm that you have interest in working for. What does that mean in terms of making a connection? Well, certainly you have to have some base level credibility. You need to establish that you can do the job, that you have the kind of credentials that are typical of the people that are hired by that firm. But then it starts to go deeper. And I think the one area that I can highlight for you is to every time you meet someone at that firm, say to yourself, I will potentially work on a project with that person. That person is going to rely on me. And also, that person is going to be scared out of their mind that I will collapse in a crisis or I can't get the job done. Because the consulting job has a lot of stress to it. And you're on a consulting engagement with 4 or 5 people, you have a mountain of work to do that can almost seem insurmountable. This is making it sound super fun, right? And things go wrong. Things go a little bit sideways sometimes. If I'm on that engagement, will the engagement manager know that they can trust me to get things done? So, how do you do that throughout your interview process? Well, when you talk to people, you get to know them. You ask them about the challenges that they have with their current client. Are there any rough spots that you all are dealing with? There's an acknowledgement that the job isn't just sexy, but the job is also difficult. That's why it's such a high paying job, by the way. There's also, I think, a way that you can get to know people more deeply, not to the degree of a friendship, because at the interview stage, that might be pushing the boundary a bit much, but having an understanding of who the person is. And I think about that when I was recruiting with a couple of different consulting firms throughout my career and just talking to the people and learning, what are your hobbies and what are your interests and what are the things that you do on clients when you're not just working, and learning about the cultural norms and the environment and what do people have kind of in their backgrounds that enable them to do the job successfully and also sometimes create challenges. Nowadays, if you all are doing video, you can see people's office spaces. So there's also presently a slight change in the dynamic. Now, it doesn't mean that you should ask 83 questions about the pictures on somebody's wall, but you could, you could potentially ask the person, did you have to redecorate your home office now for the stay at home, or, and try to make a little bit of light about it. And then generally people will talk about things in their background. So I think the point is to remember that the people that you're speaking to are human. They are people with interest in lives and careers and challenges, just like everybody else. And if you only stay on the surface of a conversation, you're not going to get to know that person or what makes that person really special, or makes them unique, or makes them fun, or makes them interesting. And so feeling confident to ask a few questions that just push the boundaries outside of the professional limits, you have to have some confidence to do that. You have to take the bull by the horns to be able to do that. Okay. But the summary comes back for this whole tip number 4 is that I'm going to hire you both to get the job done on my team, where I need to trust that you can work at the highest standards, potentially under a crisis situation. And if I am stuck with you, stuck in the nicest possible way, on an airplane at an airport or on a project that's really, really difficult, or it's a 2 week due diligence and we're going to work together 19 hours a day, I do want to make sure that you're the type of individual that I would enjoy conversing with. So that also means, ask people about hobbies and books they read and what TV shows they're watching and what do they like to cook, and, have they had some really interesting takeout in this, kind of weird shutdown world. That is how you'll make those connections and get a little bit deeper. Okay, so the last, number 5, my tip. I encourage you to prepare physically. Many people focus on the interview prep, which is the content. Absolutely, you have to focus on that. But you also need to take into consideration that interviews are physically taxing. And whether it's because you're sitting for a couple of hours, if you have back to back interviews, whether it's because the activity of your brain makes your body kind of sweat, whether it's the adrenaline rushing because of the nerves of the interview setting. There's so many reasons why this is valuable. What does it mean? Whatever you like to do, and within capabilities, of course, different people have different physical situations. Find a way to combine some physical activity with interview prep. I had been known, I'm going to admit, I don't do this as much as I should these days, but in my prior days, I would do interview prep on a treadmill. So I would come home from work. It might be 7, 8 o'clock. I might have been in the interview process with a company, and I'd get on the treadmill, and I wouldn't walk at a super fast pace, but I would walk fast enough to kind of get my heartbeat up a little bit, my breathing a little bit heavier, and then I would run through interview questions. I might do market sizing problems. And sometimes, I had a laptop sitting in front of me. Sometimes I'm just kind of running it through in my head. There are 2 benefits of doing this. One, it's time efficient. Isn't that great? Number 2, you are conditioning yourself to handle the physical stress and load of the interview setting. And you're going to potentially be a little bit nervous, and that's going to create a little bit of adrenaline, kind of, get your heart racing. If you've learned how to talk through that through your interview prep, that is hugely beneficial. Yes, thank you, Hua, for that comment. You can pull up YouTube and watch videos. But I'm encouraging, I love that. But on top of it, I'm actually encouraging certain types of activities where you're going to speak out loud. Walk up the stairs, get on a treadmill, ride a bike. I mean, do things that aren't going to injure you. And the act of speaking is great. Also, if you're someone who likes other things such as yoga, it's kind of nice to have quiet time, and maybe practice a mantra that builds confidence about the interview process, right? There's many, many different ways to behave in these circumstances. Whenever I'm working with individuals, and certainly I'm not doing this in person right now, but we do it on the video. When I was gathering with clients of mine at my office building has an open lobby, and there's a stairwell that goes between the 2 floors. And so we would meet at my office. I would stand at the top of the stairs. I'm the coach, remember? And I would have my client start at the bottom, start speaking their resume walk up to the top of the stairs. And like 2 half flights of stairs and get that, and then do it down the stairs and do that 3 or 4 times. And it works really, really well, and it puts you in a different mindset. These are fun things, I think, also that help you, that establish this mind body connection. And although that may sound a bit quirky, I've found so many people that have been able to apply some of those techniques, and it really makes a difference. The thing that I try to aspire to when I'm coaching individuals is that the process of preparing has this really interesting balance of intensity but calm. And one of the ways that we do that is through kind of mind body activities, which can be physical workout. So you're intense, you're assertive about what you're doing, you're building confidence. Those things then allow you to say, I'm going to be ready for my interview. I'm going to be ready for my interview. The opposite of this is a little bit of the scramble situation. It's a bit like a couple days a week when my kids are leaving the house, and we're trying to grab a shoe and a t-shirt and a mask, and they're not all in their backpack. That's the scramble situation. I don't want you to be in the scramble situation. I'd rather have you be in that kind of focused, intense, but calm. And these things, especially this physical activity, helps to bring some of that together. So I'm going to make a couple more comments, and then I've got a couple questions from the registration, but I'll take some questions from all of you either by the chat or live. So just a couple more things with all of these. As you are thinking about your interview preparation, and some of you may be thinking about it, some of you may be in the throes of it, there are so many things to do. I am greatly appreciative of that. I mean, I have at my desk a set of stickies. I think I've got 10 things on my sticky that were actually supposed to be done yesterday. I've also got a bunch of things with my family that need to get done. That's just very normal. I absolutely appreciate it. What I've learned, though, through some of the feedback and discussions with my clients is that some of these can be broken down into very small tasks. But the small things can have a huge impact, because in the world of what do all the job seekers do, sometimes they don't focus on the small things. And these are the kinds of things that if you find 15 or 20 minutes a day or every other day, the cumulative impact can be really huge.